So at the World Cup, the playing field is, well, it's supposed to be level, right? At least when we're talking about preparation.
Right. I mean, they all have the same tools.
Exactly. Every single team has, access to the same cutting edge analytic software. They all have the exact same footage of their
Yeah,
opponents.
those massive tactical screens in the luxury hotel conference rooms.
Right. And yet, if you look closely at the data, this really strange paradox emerges. The teams that spend the most consecutive hours grinding away in the film room, like the ones putting in the most grueling, exhaustive study sessions, are very often the ones getting sent home in the group stage.
Which is wild, because it completely dismantles our traditional assumptions about effort.
Yeah, exactly.
We tend to equate hours logged with knowledge gained. But in an environment with that much tactical complexity, the differentiator isn't resources. And it certainly isn't willpower.
Right.
It is the absolute definition of a cognitive bottleneck.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a hidden habit that separates elite performance from early elimination. And whether you're prepping for a high-stakes boardroom presentation or trying to master a complex new skill or even just figuring out how to better coach a youth athlete, this framework really challenges everything we assume about how to absorb information.
It really does.
You might remember our deep dive yesterday on rest day discipline, where we looked at what top-tier players actually do on their physical days off. Well, today we're focusing on the mental side of things, like what actually happens when they sit down to study their opponents.
And our roadmap for this comes from some incredibly detailed notes by Lucky Mankasana.
Yeah, he's got quite the background.
He does. He's a former Dartmouth captain, spent years playing professionally for clubs like the New York Cosmos and the Tampa Bay Rowdies. And today, he actually works in AI in sports development.
Which is such a cool transition.
Oh, absolutely. It makes him uniquely positioned because he lives right at this intersection of, lived on-the-pitch experience and high-level data-driven analysis.
And his central thesis is striking because it highlights this massive gap between active and passive learning. He basically argues that the timing and structure of film study dictates whether a brain is actually retaining actionable data or just letting a broadcast wash over it.
Yeah, it's a completely different mental state.
Okay, let's unpack this because Nkosana isolates the specific habits of the eliminated teams, and their approach to timing is something I think a lot of us are, well, pretty guilty of in our own professional lives.
Oh, 100%. It comes down to the cognitive state of the players during those specific sessions. Miko Sana noted a really distinct pattern among the teams that went home early.
Right, the ones that didn't make it out of the group.
Exactly. Their primary study habit involved gathering the entire squad the night before a crucial match for this broad, sweeping film session. You know the setup?
Oh, yeah.
The players are seated in a dark room, and the coaching staff just kind of walks them through the opponent's overarching formation. They review every set piece. They highlight the star players, discuss the general philosophy of the opposing manager.
So the coaches are essentially delivering a lecture, and the players are just an audience.
Precisely. It is entirely passive viewing. And, neurologically speaking, when you receive a massive broadcast of generalized information the night before a high-stress event, your retention of actionable solutions is remarkably low.
Interesting, because it feels productive, right?
It does. The players might recognize the patterns while looking at the screen, and it provides this false sense of security. They feel prepared because they've seen the information, but they aren't internalizing the specific spatial triggers they'll actually need to react to on the field.
It's the illusion of competence, which makes the habits of the quarterfinalists so fascinating. They break their study into two distinct, highly pressurized windows.
Very different approach.
Right, so window number 1 happens 48 hours before the match, and they aren't looking at the big picture at all. They engage in 20 minutes of isolated, position-specific clips.
Right.
And then window number 2 takes place the morning of the match. Meng Kosana notes they watch a maximum of 5 short clips. And the constraint here is incredibly tight. They only watch the opponent's first 5 seconds at a transition. That is the entire scope of the morning session.
And we really need to look at the mechanics of that morning session because the magic isn't just in the brevity of the clips.
Right, there's more to it.
Yeah, it's in the prompt. The coach doesn't simply play the footage and tell the players, watch out for this specific movement. For every single clip, the coach asks one solitary question. where is the space?
Where's the space? Wow, it really reminds me of the difference between two students studying for a massive exam.
Okay, how so?
Well, the eliminated teams are operating like a student who crams by passively rereading a 400-page textbook the night before the test. You drag a highlighter across the paragraphs, and because your eyes are tracking the words, you trick your brain into thinking it's absorbing knowledge.
Oh, I've definitely been that student.
Right, we all have. But the quarterfinalists, they're utilizing hyper-targeted flashcards. They aren't trying to ingest the whole book. They're forcing their brains to retrieve and produce an answer on the spot under a time constraint.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that morning of question, where is the space? It fundamentally alters visual processing.
It shifts the whole dynamic.
Exactly. When a coach asks that, the player can no longer rely on memorizing a static formation. They are forced to solve a dynamic spatial problem. The brain transitions from acting as a passive storage device into, like, an active analytical engine.
Because they have to actually find the answer in real time.
Right. Think about those first 5 seconds of a transition on a soccer pitch. The structure's completely chaotic. Players are scrambling. The shape is broken.
It's just a mess.
Total mess.
Yeah.
But by asking where is the space, in that specific chaotic window, the coach is training the player's visual cortex to instantly identify the exact structural vulnerability they need to exploit a few hours later. They are rehearsing a solution, not observing a problem.
That is such a crucial distinction. Rehearsing a solution. So if the morning session is that laser focused on 5 seconds of chaos, what exactly are they looking at during that earlier 20-minute window, like to set the stage? Because timing clearly matters, but as Mankosana points out, looking at the right variables is what makes the timing effective.
Yeah, and this is where Momkosana introduces his rule on microfocus. He states that general team film tells a player what the opponent does, but position-specific film dictates what that player personally needs to do.
Okay, so macro versus micro.
Right. In highly complex environments, we often bog ourselves down in the macro when survival depends entirely on the micro. For example, a left back preparing for a match should not be wasting cognitive energy analyzing the opposing center backs.
Right, they're on the other side of the field.
Exactly. In elite preparation, that left back isolates their film entirely to the opposing winger's behavioral triggers. They ignore the rest of the pitch entirely.
And Minkosana highlights a perfect, concrete example of this from the round of 16 in the World Cup. He looks at the most physical, grueling match of that round and contrasts the preparation of the two teams.
This example is so telling.
It really is. So for the team that ultimately won, their center backs spent 40 minutes exclusively studying the opposing striker's hold-up play and combination patterns in the final third. But they didn't watch a single goal.
No highlights at all.
None. They stripped out all highlights. They only watched the repetitive, mundane moments where that striker received the ball with their back to the goal. Consequently, they stepped onto the pitch knowing down to the millisecond when to apply pressure and when to drop off.
And then you contrast that with the team that lost that very same match.
Right.
Their preparation was rooted completely in the macro. They studied general formation film. They analyzed what the opponent looked like as a collective unit.
Which sounds good on paper.
Sure, it sounds thorough, but the result on the pitch was immediate and devastating. Their defensive line was pulled out of position 3 separate times in the first half alone, yielding the exact same pattern, the exact same structural gap, and the exact same goal each time.
Wow.
They understood the broader team strategy, but they were entirely blind to the specific behavioral triggers of the man standing directly in front of them.
But let me push back on that framework for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if a player is stripping away all the macro context to solely obsess over one specific opponent's shoulder drops or like their pivot foot, aren't they leaving themselves incredibly vulnerable? I mean, if the opposing team changes their overall shape or runs a trick play, a defender who has only studied one tree is going to be completely blind to the forest fire.
That is natural concern, absolutely. But what's fascinating here is how the human brain manages cognitive load.
Okay, how so?
Well, on a professional pitch, or frankly during any high-stakes scenario in the corporate world, the sheer volume of data coming at you in real time is paralyzing.
Oh, yeah, it's overwhelming.
Right. So if you attempt to process the forest, the overarching strategy of all 11 opposing players, while simultaneously defending a world-class striker darting into your zone, your brain has to split its processing power.
It has to do two things at once.
And that split causes hesitation. In elite sports, hesitation is fatal.
Ah, I see.
So by eliminating the highlights and the broader team shapes from the film session, the winning team wasn't blinding their defenders. They were hyper-focusing their visual acuity.
They were narrowing the lens.
Exactly. They trained them to recognize micro-behavioral triggers, a slight shift in weight, the angle of a hip, a specific glance. When you reduce the cognitive load, reaction time plummets. Your body simply reacts to the trigger you've analyzed 40 times in the film room.
You are bypassing the intellect to train the reflex.
Yes.
That fundamentally changes the objective of the film session. But if drilling into a specific micro-trigger drops reaction time that effectively, why wouldn't a team just study that single trigger for 3 straight hours to make it absolutely bulletproof?
Because there is a strict biological limitation to how much concentrated visual data a human can absorb before the brain's defense mechanisms basically kick in.
It just shuts down.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Coaches and leaders frequently overestimate the attention span of individuals operating under high stress. The quarterfinalists understand the neurobiology of attention, which leads directly to Menkosana's 90-second rule.
Right, the 90-second rule. Menkosana points out that for these elite squads, every single film clip is capped at a strict 90 seconds. Like, there is no leeway.
None.
If a clip runs longer than a minute and a half, the brain inherently reverts to that passive viewing state we discussed earlier. The player stops hunting for the pattern, they stop internally asking, where is the space? And they simply, endure the footage until it ends.
It is a protective measure by the brain, really.
Yeah.
When you flood the visual cortex with continuous data without providing a break to consolidate that information, the brain effectively shuts the gates to new learning.
It's just full.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to combat this, quarterfinalist coaches employ what Menkosana calls the single-sentence metric.
Oh, this is brilliant. The rule is that every clip must have exactly one tactical point. Once the clip ends, if a player can synthesize that point into a single clear sentence, the session is working.
It's such a great litmus test.
It really is. Menkosana includes this great quote from one of the elite coaches who states that if they need more than 90 seconds to show a piece of film, they aren't actually trying to teach one concept, they are attempting to teach 3, which guarantees the players will absorb none of them.
Right. If you highlight everything, you highlight nothing.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me because the underlying psychology maps perfectly onto how we interact with technology today.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Think about how differently our brains process short-form video on a phone compared to a 2-hour documentary.
Oh, it's night and day.
Totally. When we know a piece of content is brief, we physically lean in. We are actively hunting for the immediate payoff, the core message, or the punchline. We are searching for the friction that creates an aha moment. But the second someone cues up a 15-minute video, our posture changes. We lean back. We disengage our critical thinking and wait for the content to just entertain us.
That parallel highlights exactly what is happening in the brain. The 90-second constraint forces a shift from passive consumer to active problem solver.
It forces engagement.
Yes. It leverages the reticular activating system, or the RAS. Think of the RAS as the bouncer at the door of your brain's processing center. It filters out unnecessary data to focus on what is immediately critical.
Okay, the bouncer. I like that.
Right. So when you impose a tight 90-second window, you signal to the RAS that the information is urgent. It goes into overdrive, aggressively scanning the visual field for the single most important detail because it knows the window is closing rapidly.
Wow.
But if you give that same brain 15 minutes of continuous film, the RAS relaxes. It assumes there's plenty of time to find the pattern later. And by the time the crucial behavioral trigger actually appears on screen, the brain's filter has already missed it.
It is the ultimate example of constraint breeding focus.
Absolutely.
So we've outlined this elite framework. We've got surgical timing, absolute micro-focus, and the biological necessity of the 90-second limit. But how does a framework engineered for World Cup quarterfinalists map onto someone just trying to raise their own baseline? Like, if you're a listener wanting to apply this to a 14-year-old youth athlete you coach, or even to your own preparation for a major project at work, how does this translate?
Menkosana translates these principles specifically for youth development. And it's fascinating because it requires a total restructuring of how amateurs review their performance.
Okay.
The foundational rule for a 14-year-old reviewing their own game footage is to watch only one specific action at a time.
Yeah.
A young player should never sit down and watch a continuous, unedited replay of their match from start to finish.
Because without a filter, they're just staring at the ball and reliving the emotional highs and lows of the game.
Exactly. They aren't learning, they're just spectating. The instructions should be highly targeted.
Like what?
Well, Minkosana suggests they watch only the touches they took in the first 15 minutes, nothing else. Or, even better for spatial awareness, they should only watch the moments they physically check their shoulder to scan for space before receiving a pass. They isolate one specific mechanical action.
And then they apply the 90-second rule to their own footage, right?
Yes, exactly.
Minkosana emphasizes that a tightly edited 90-second clip of a youth player's specific mechanical habit holds exponentially more actionable data than a 45-minute continuous replay. Because in those 90 seconds, the brain can actually isolate and process the mechanical flaw or success.
But the true catalyst for improvement happens before they even press play. This is where Minkosana introduces the vital concept of the pre-question.
Right. You have to formulate and write down a specific question before the video starts. Something like, why did I consistently lose the 50-50 challenges in the midfield? Or, where was the structural space when I received that specific pass?
Without that written pre-question, film study is devoid of a hypothesis.
You're just watching.
Exactly. The player isn't analyzing. They're just consuming their own highlight or lowlight reel. The question acts as a lens, priming the neural pathways to search for structural anomalies rather than just passively observing the action.
That makes so much sense.
Which brings us to Minkosana's overarching philosophy for evaluating talent and performance. Watch the purpose, not the ball.
Watch the purpose, not the ball. That is a profound directive. I mean, amateurs, fans, young players, we're all hypnotized by the ball.
Sure, it's designed to be that way.
It's the focal point of the broadcast. But Minkosana points out that elite players watch the opponent they are required to beat. The ball merely travels through space. The opponent moves with tactical purpose. If you want to understand the game, you have to watch the purpose.
This raises an important question about how we operate outside of sports.
Oh, for sure.
Because how often in the corporate world or in academia do we consume massive amounts of data without a directing pre-question? Think about the volume of reports, industry articles, or spreadsheets you process in a given week.
It's a lot.
Right. If you approach that data without asking yourself, what specific structural problem am I trying to solve by reading this? Abstrud. You're simply engaging in highlight reel learning.
You're just skimming.
Yeah, you skim the data, you recognize the buzzwords, and you generate the illusion of competence without any foundational understanding of the underlying mechanics. You are just watching the ball.
Highlight reel learning. That is a dangerous trap because the act of reading feels so productive, like I read the report, I did the work.
Exactly.
To help break that habit, Minkosana offers a very specific, practical exercise. It requires absolutely no equipment, and you can test it tonight in your living room, either with a youth athlete or, honestly, just to test your own visual processing.
It's a simple drill, but it is incredibly taxing mentally.
Okay, so you pull up exactly 5 minutes of any World Cup quarterfinal match. You select one specific player, a fullback, a holding midfielder, doesn't matter. And for 3 consecutive minutes, you watch only that individual. You must actively fight the urge to follow the ball.
Which is much harder than it sounds.
Oh, I bet. And here's where the active interrogation comes in. Every 30 seconds, you pause the footage, and you force yourself to answer 3 questions.
Right.
Number 1, where is that player looking? Number 2, what is their exact spatial positioning when their team possesses the ball? And number 3, what is their immediate directional movement the millisecond their team loses possession?
And Minkosana asserts that executing this 3-minute exercise builds in more spatial awareness and tactical positioning than a standard 2-hour practice session on the field.
That's incredible. 3 minutes versus 2 hours.
Because it forces the brain out of the comfort of passive broadcasting. It demands active, rapid-fire structural analysis.
So what does this all mean? When we synthesize all of Minkosana's data, the overarching lesson for you is that true elite preparation is not about the volume of your consumption.
No, it's not.
It's not about logging extra hours watching broad generalized material just to feel like you put in the work. True preparation is about consuming highly isolated data in tightly constrained increments, armed with a surgically precise question.
It is the deliberate transition from being a passive consumer of information to an active interrogator of systems.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Take a moment to consider the most complex challenge you are facing right now, whether it's a bottleneck in your business or a plateau in a personal project. If you were forced to eliminate all your broad research, limit your preparation to a strict 90-second window, and you were only allowed to ask one single question of the data in front of you, what would your question be?
It's a tough question to answer.
It is. Are you currently spending your time studying the macro highlights of your problem, or are you actually zooming in to study the behavioral triggers in the exact moments of transition? Because the data is clear, the most grueling preparation in the world won't save you if you are studying the wrong things. True elite performance isn't just about outworking the competition, it's about knowing exactly where the space is long before the chaos even begins.
It really is a complete paradigm shift in how we approach mastery.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.